You've made a pest of yourself, Dr. Vey, but even pests can be repurposed. The feed split. Kestrel's medpod appeared, his eyes wide and unseeing, his lips parted in a silent scream. A syringe hovered above his arm, filled with a viscous black liquid. Neurotoxins, Krell said. One injection and his suffering ends, or I can let the necrosis take him. Slowly. Soren's fists clenched. What do you want? The specimen, the seed. Deliver it, and I'll grant him mercy. The sapling's roots tightened around Soren's wrist, their light flaring crimson. A voice, not the archivist's but deeper, primal, vibrated in his skull. She lies. Tick-tock, doctor, Krell purred. The transmission died. The haven shuddered as Echelon's fleet opened fire. Plasma bolts scorched the coral hull, but the damage sealed instantly, bioluminescent resin bubbling over the wounds. Jin banked the station, returning fire with organic cannons that spat crystalline shrapnel. A scout ship imploded, its debris spiraling into the void. They're targeting the engines, Jin yelled. Soren gripped the console. Can you hold them off? Not unless your magic plant grows teeth. As if summoned, the sapling's roots surged into the weapon systems. The cannons reconfigured, firing spores that latched onto Echelon hulls. Bioluminescent vines erupted, cracking metal and shorting circuits. Crew pods ejected in panic. Holy hell, Jin muttered. It's eating them. Soren stared at the carnage. This wasn't symbiosis. This was predation. The archivist's hologram flickered beside him. The cleansing is balance. You must choose, your son's life or theirs. I didn't ask for this, Soren snapped. No, you only lit the fuse. Krell's flagship launched a boarding pod. It struck the haven's docking bay, disgorging Echelon enforcers in blackened armor. Soren grabbed a pulse pistol, but Jin was already moving, her rifle barking as she picked off invaders. Get to the core, she shouted. I'll hold them here. Soren ran, the station's walls contracting to guide him. The sapling's core glowed ahead, a nexus of roots cradling a luminous bud. But as he reached it, the vision struck. Kestrel standing in a field of ash, the sapling, now a colossal tree, towers behind him. They're scared, Dad, he whispers. The light, it's so scared. The bud unfurled, revealing a crystalline orb. Inside, a luminary fetus floated, its bioluminescence faint but steady. The first of the new, the archivist intoned. The bridge. Soren recoiled. You want me to replace him? To free him. His blood is the key, but his soul is the lock. Alarms blared. Jin's voice crackled over the comms. They've breached the core. Echelon enforcers stormed in, rifles raised. Behind them strode Director Krell, her expression glacial. Pathetic, she said, eyeing the orb. You trade humanity's future for a weed. She raised a detonator. Last chance, Doctor. Soren stepped between her and the orb. You'll have to burn through me. Krell smiled, gladly. The detonator clicked. In the medpod light years away, Kestrel's body arched. His veins blazed black, necrosis consuming him. His scream echoed through the haven's core, a sound that wasn't sound, a vibration that shattered the enforcers' visors. Dad. The sapling's roots erupted. Bioluminescent tendrils speared Krell's enforcers, draining them to husks. The orb, light surged, and Kestrel's hologram materialized, a spectral child of light and shadow. Stop, he whispered. The station stilled. Krell staggered back, detonator falling from her hand. What is this? Kestrel turned to Soren, his eyes twin supernovas. I choose the light. The orb shattered. A pulse radiated from the haven, washing over the fleet. Echelon ships went dark, their engines dying. Krell's flagship cracked, atmosphere venting into the void. On Aurelia Prime, Kestrel's medpod glowed. The necrosis receded. His veins blazed blue. In the haven's core, Soren collapsed, the sapling's roots retreating. Jin hauled him up, her face smeared with soot and ore. What the hell was that? Soren stared at the dormant orb. A beginning. Chapter 9. The Haven drifted in the silent wake of the cleansing pulse, its coral hull still glowing faintly, like embers refusing to die. Inside, the air hummed with a new tension, part hope, part dread. Soren stood at the observation deck, staring at the crippled echelon fleet. Their ships hung lifeless, engines dark, but he knew better than to believe it was over. Krell survived. She always did. Behind him, the organic walls pulsed rhythmically, a heartbeat synced to Kestrel's breathing. The boy slept fitfully in the medbay, his body now a latticework of bioluminescent veins and scarred flesh. The necrosis had retreated, but something else had taken root, a whisper in his blood, a song only he could hear. Jin leaned against the doorway, her arms crossed. Her left sleeve was rolled up, revealing a fresh tattoo of intertwined Luminari runes. "He's awake," she said, "and he's different." Soren didn't turn. "How?" "See for yourself." Kestrel sat cross-legged on the medbay floor, surrounded by floating holograms of star maps and Luminari light script. His eyes, once human, now swirled with galaxies. When he spoke, his voice layered with echoes. "The sanctuary calls. They're buried where the twin suns drown." "Who's buried?" Soren knelt, careful not to touch the holograms. They burned cold against his skin. "The ones who came before, the ones who refused the feast." Kestrel's gaze fixed on a point beyond the ship. "They hid the heart. We need it." Jin muttered a curse. Kids talking in riddles. "It's the symbiosis," Soren said. "The Luminari's memories are surfacing." He gripped Kestrel's shoulder. "Where do we go?" The boy blinked, his eyes flickering back to Hazel. "Eclipse Ridge, the dead colony." Jin froze. "That's a graveyard. Echelon slagged it during the purge." "And salted the earth after," Soren said quietly. "Perfect place to hide." Eclipse Ridge was a jagged scar on a barren moon, its domes shattered, its soil laced with radiation. The Haven descended through ash clouds, its landing struts crunching on glassed ground. Kestrel led them, barefoot and unflinching, through the ruins. His footprints glowed faintly, the radiation parting around him like water. "He's immune," Jin whispered. "Not immune," Soren said. "The Luminari in him, it's rewriting the rules." They stopped at a collapsed bunker. Kestrel pressed his palm to the rusted door. Bioluminescent vines erupted from his skin, cracking the metal. Inside, the air reeked of decay, and beneath it, the sharp tang of Luminari resin. The chamber walls were lined with cryopods, their glass frosted. Inside each, a Luminari hybrid lay suspended, their bodies fused with crystalline growths. "Survivors of the purge," Soren breathed. "They've been here decades." Kestrel touched a pod. The hybrid inside stirred, their eyes opening, solid black, streaked with gold. "You are late, child." The voice echoed from every pod at once. Jin drew her pistol, but Soren stilled her hand. "We didn't know," he said. "You were not meant to." The hybrids' mouths moved in unison. "The heart remains. Take it, before the devourer returns." The floor shuddered. Dust rained from the ceiling as a low, mechanical growl vibrated through the bunker. "Scouts," Jin hissed, peering through a crack in the door. "Echelon's new models. They're not here for us, they're digging." The Echelon drones were insectal, six-legged and faceless, their drills whining as they bored into the moon's crust. Krell's voice crackled over their comms frequency. "Burn the relics, leave nothing." "She knows about the heart," Soren said. Kestrel closed his eyes. The bunker's hybrids stirred, their pods hissing open. "We fight." Jin smirked, cocking her rifle. "Now you're talking." The battle was chaos. Hybrids moved with uncanny speed, their crystalline claws shattering drone armor. Kestrel stood at the center, his light weaving a shield around the bunker. Soren fought beside Jin, his pulse pistol scorching drone after drone. But the swarm was endless. "We need the heart," Soren shouted. Kestrel's shield flickered. A drill-tipped drone lunged at him. Jin tackled it, her blade plunging into its core. The explosion threw her back, shrapnel embedding in her side. Jin, Soren dragged her behind a rubble pile. She coughed blood. Go, get the damn heart. Kestrel's light flared. The ground split, revealing a cavern below. There. The heart was a massive luminary crystal, its core pulsing like a star. Soren reached for it. A shot rang out. Krell stood at the cavern's edge, her pistol smoking, sentimental to the end. Soren collapsed, clutching his thigh. Kestrel stepped between them, his light dimming. "You'll die here," Krell said. "All of you." The crystal hummed. Kestrel pressed his bleeding palm to it. "No, we rise." Light erupted. The drones disintegrated. Krell staggered back, her cybernetics shorting. The hybrids surged forward, their claws at her throat. "Stop!" Kestrel's voice froze them. "She lives to remember." Krell fled. The haven carried the heart in its core, the crystal's light healing Jin's wounds, strengthening the hybrids. But as they ascended, Kestrel faltered. "What's wrong?" Soren asked. The boy stared at his hands, now translucent. "The heart, it's heavy." In the crystal's glow, Soren saw the truth. Kestrel was unraveling, the symbiosis consuming him. To be the bridge is to burn. Chapter 10. The haven's corridors hummed with the heart crystal's resonance, a sound like distant thunder trapped in glass. Kestrel drifted ahead of Soren and Jin, his footsteps leaving faint bioluminescent imprints that faded as quickly as they formed. His hands, now almost translucent, trailed along the organic walls, coaxing the ship's veins to pulse in time with his ragged breaths. "How much farther?" Jin muttered, her rifle slung low but her grip tense. "The sanctuary isn't a place," Kestrel said, his voice layered with the static of overlapping whispers. "It's a threshold." Soren glanced at the holomap projected from his wrist. The coordinates Kestrel had etched into the air, a string of luminary light script, led to a nameless sector deep in the graveyard belt, a graveyard of derelict warships and forgotten colonies. If echelons already dug up Eclipse Ridge, they'll be crawling here too. Kestrel paused, his head tilting as if listening to a frequency only he could hear. "They're already waiting." The haven dropped out of hyperspace at the sector's edge. Before them loomed a planet shrouded in a swirling nebula, violet and gold tendrils coiling around a cracked, barren world. Ancient ship carcasses orbited it, their hulls scrawled with luminary runes that glowed faintly in the nebula's light. "The Veil," Jin said, her tattooed arm twitching. "Heard stories. Ships go in, don't come out." Kestrel pressed his palm to the viewport. "They're sleeping, the ones who refused." "Refused what?" Soren asked. "The feast." The ship shuddered as the nebula's tendrils lashed the hull. Alarms blared, radiation spikes, gravity wells, life support failures, but Kestrel's light wove through the systems, silencing them one by one. "Steady," he murmured, though his form flickered like a dying star. Jin gripped Soren's arm. "If this goes sideways." "It already has." The haven breached the nebula. The Veil's surface was a maze of crystalline canyons, their walls vibrating with trapped echoes of luminary song. Kestrel led them to a fissure, its mouth glowing with the same light as the heart crystal. Inside, the air thrummed. The walls were lined with luminary hybrids, thousands of them, their bodies fused to the stone, eyes closed, chests rising in unison. At the chamber's heart stood an altar of black crystal, its surface etched with a single word in light script. "Remember." They hibernated, Soren realized, to escape the purge. Kestrel approached the altar, to wait for the bridge. A shadow shifted. Director Krell stepped into the light, her cybernetics glitching, her face half melted from the heart crystal's blast. "Touching," she rasped, "but you're too late." She raised a detonator. The explosion tore through the chamber. Hybrids shattered, their crystallized bodies dissolving into ash. Kestrel's light flared, shielding Soren and Jin as the altar cracked. The heart, Soren lunged, but Krell fired. The shot grazed his shoulder, spinning him into the wall. Jin tackled Krell, their struggle a blur of fists and sparks. The detonator skidded away. Kestrel knelt at the altar, his hands plunging into the crack. Light erupted, searing the chamber. Wake! The surviving hybrids stirred. Their eyes snapped open, black and gold, and they moved as one, crystalline claws shredding Krell's remaining enforcers. Krell staggered back, clutching a bleeding arm. This changes nothing. Echelon will burn your sanctuary to stardust. Kestrel rose, the cracks in his body glowing. You are ash, and ash forgets. The hybrids converged. Krell's scream was cut short. Silence fell. The altar's light dimmed, revealing a hollow where the heart crystal's twin lay nestled. Kestrel lifted it, his arms trembling. Two halves, he whispered. Balance. Soren gripped his son's shoulder. What does it mean? The first heart was forgiveness. This one is wrath. Jin picked up Krell's discarded detonator, her face unreadable. Which one do we need? Kestrel's gaze drifted to the fissure's ceiling, where the nebula swirled like a living thing. Both. The haven ascended, the twin heart crystals pulsing in its core. Kestrel collapsed in the medbay, his body fracturing further with each beat. Soren scoured the archives, desperate for answers. Jin found him hours later, surrounded by holograms of Luminari rituals. He's worse. Soren didn't look up. The crystals are symbiotic. They need a vessel. So use one. It'll kill him. He's dying anyway. The words hung between them. Somewhere deep in the ship, the hybrids chanted in low, resonant tones. Kestrel's voice crackled over the comms. The devourer comes. On the view screen, the nebula churned. A ship emerged, an echelon dreadnought, its hull studded with stolen Luminari tech. They've weaponized the relics, Jin hissed. Soren activated the haven's defenses. Where's Kes? Gone. He found the boy in the heart chamber, the twin crystals floating before him. You can't, Soren said. Kestrel smiled, his edges blurring. I already did. He plunged his hands into the crystals. Light consumed him. Chapter 11. The haven shuddered as the devourer's shadow eclipsed the stars. Its hull, a grotesque amalgamation of echelon steel and Luminari coral, pulsed with stolen bioluminescence, veins of blue light thrumming like a mockery of the heart crystals. Soren gripped the organic console, its surface slick with resin, as the view screen flickered with tactical readouts. Hybrid fighters swarmed from the dreadnought's belly, their wings serrated and glowing with the same sickly light as Krell's slagged fleet. Shields at 47%, Jin barked, her fingers darting across the pilot's interface. The haven banked sharply, evading a volley of plasma fire. Their weapons are synced to the Luminari frequency. They're adapting. Soren glanced at Kestrel, who stood motionless in the heart chamber's threshold. The twin crystals floated above his palms, their light weaving through his translucent skin. His eyes, now voids speckled with starlight, were fixed on the devourer. Kes, we need you, Soren shouted. The boy didn't move. They're singing, can't you hear it? A low, discordant hum vibrated through the ship. The hybrids in the corridors froze, their crystalline claws retracting as they tilted their heads, entranced. The devourer's broadcasting a Luminari distress signal, Soren realized. It's hijacking their song. Jin cursed, slamming the thrusters into reverse, then shut it off. Kestrel's hands trembled. The heart crystals flared, and for a heartbeat the devourer's weapons stuttered. Then the hum deepened, and the haven's shields buckled. The hybrids' betrayal. The first breach came in Sector 5. Hybrids turned on their kin, claws rending through bioluminescent flesh as the devourer's signal overwrote their loyalty. Soren sprinted through the carnage, pulse pistols scorching corrupted hybrids, their shattered bodies dissolving into blackened ash. "Fall back to the core," he ordered, but his voice drowned in the cacophony. In the heart chamber, Kestrel knelt, the crystals dimming. "It's too loud, I can't." Jin grabbed his shoulders. "You're the damn bridge. Bridge this." The boy's head snapped up. "They're hurting. We'll all be dead if you don't focus." Soren yanked her back. "He's not a weapon, Jin. He's all we've got." Kestrel screamed. Light erupted, tearing through the ship. The corrupted hybrids disintegrated, their ashes swirling into the crystal's glow. The Haven's hull reconfigured, coral plates sealing the breaches as the Devourer's hum faltered. "Now," Soren dragged Kestrel to the console. "Sever their signal." The boy's fingers plunged into the organic interface. His light surged, a radiant spear lancing toward the Devourer. For a moment, the dreadnought hung silent, then its stolen luminari veins blazed crimson, deflecting the strike. The backlash hurled Kestrel against the wall. His form flickered, edges dissolving into stardust. "Enough!" Soren caught him, cradling his fading body. "You'll kill yourself." Kestrel's whisper was a chorus. "It's the only way." Jin's gambit. Jin watched the Devourer's cannons recharge, her hand brushing the detonator in her pocket. Krell's last gift. She'd seen enough wars to know how this ended, heroes martyred, monsters reborn. "Take the helm," she told Soren. "What?" She shoved him into the pilot's seat. "Keep him alive. I'll buy time." "Jin." She was already gone, sprinting to the hangar where the hybrids, fighters, docked. The smallest one responded to her touch, its cockpit sealing around her as she input the Devourer's core coordinates. "You owe me a drink, Splicer," she muttered, igniting the thrusters. The core. The Devourer's innards were a labyrinth of fused flesh and metal. Jin carved through corrupted hybrids, her stolen fighters' claws rending echelon steel. The detonator's countdown flashed, 00, 60, as she reached the reactor, its core a pulsing mass of luminari coral. "Pretty," she spat, priming the charge. A shadow moved. Director Krell emerged, her body half consumed by crystalline growths, one eye blazing with stolen bioluminescence. "Traitor," Krell hissed. Jin smirked. "Nah, just underpaid." They lunged. The sacrifice. Aboard the Haven, Kestrel stirred. "She's there, in the dark." "Who?" Soren followed his gaze to the Devourer. "Jin." The boy's light surged. "I can reach her." "No, you're too weak." But Kestrel was already gone, his essence dissolving into the heart crystal's beam. It struck the Devourer, piercing its core. In the reactor, Jin's knife found Krell's throat as the detonator hit 0. Light. Sound. Silence. Aftermath. The Devourer cracked, its halves drifting apart on a tide of molten coral. The Haven reeled, its hull scorched but intact. In the heart chamber, Kestrel's body lay empty, the crystals dark. Soren collapsed beside him. "No, no." A hand gripped his shoulder. Jin, her face smeared with ash and triumph. "Told you I'd haunt you first." He stared. "How?" She tapped the luminari growth on her arm, a living shield, gifted in the blast. "Turns out I'm a quick learner." Kestrel gasped, his eyes snapping open, human again, if only for now. "The song, it's quiet." Soren pulled him close. "Rest, we're done here." But beyond the viewscreen, the remnants of the Devourer twitched. Coral tendrils knitting, engines flaring. A new signal pierced the static, a single, resonant chord. The Luminari's true song. And somewhere in the dark, something answered. Chapter 12. The Haven drifted in the graveyard, quiet left by the Devourer's fall, its coral hull still smoking where plasma fire had scorched grooves into its bioluminescent flesh. Inside the heart chamber, Kestrel lay suspended in a cradle of resinous tendrils, his breath shallow, his skin so translucent Soren could trace the faint glow of the twin heart crystals pulsing beneath his ribs. They were smaller now, diminished, but alive. "He's stable," Jin said, her voice flat. She leaned against the chamber's organic archway, her right arm encased in a lattice of luminary coral that had fused to her skin during the blast. It twitched occasionally, as if dreaming. For now. Soren didn't look up. He'd spent hours scouring the Haven's archives, cross-referencing the strange signal that had pierced the static after the Devourer's destruction. The Luminari's true song wasn't a melody. It was a coordinate, a summons. "We need to follow it," he said finally. Jin snorted. Right, because chasing ancient alien death hymns worked out so well last time. "It's not a hymn, it's a map." He projected the holograph, a starless sector deep in the graveyard belt, marked by a single pulsing rune. The Luminari called it Vakal, the first sanctuary. Kestrel stirred, his eyelids fluttering. Where they began. Jin stiffened. "You're supposed to be resting." "Can't." He pushed himself upright, tendrils snapping free. His eyes were human again, but his irises swam with flecks of gold. "The song's louder. They're waiting." Soren gripped his son's shoulder. "Who?" "The ones who sang first, the ones who fell." The Haven's hybrids gathered in the hangar as the ship prepared to jump. Their crystalline claws clicked restlessly, their black and gold eyes fixed on Kestrel. He moved among them, trailing fingers over their serrated limbs, their fractured light language murmuring in response. "They're scared," he said softly. Soren adjusted the nav console. "Of what?" "The same thing we are, remembering." The jump tore reality like rotten fabric. When the Haven re-emerged, the stars were gone. The sector was a void, its darkness so absolute the ship's external lights barely pierced it. Only the holograph glowed, the runes pulse quickening. "Lovely," Jin muttered. "Next you'll tell me black holes are cozy." Kestrel pressed his palm to the viewport. There. A shape coalesced in the dark, a planet-sized structure of woven luminary coral, its surface pocked with craters and veined with dying bioluminescence. It looked less like a sanctuary and more like a carcass. "Vakal," Soren breathed. "Vacorpse," Jin corrected. The Haven shuddered as the coral structure's gravity seized it. Alarms blared, but Kestrel silenced them with a wave. "It's okay. They know we're here." "Who knows?" Jin demanded. The answer came as the hangar doors groaned open. A figure stood in the threshold, tall, skeletal, its body a fusion of luminary crystal and withered flesh. Its voice rasped like wind through dead leaves. "You are late, child of the bridge." The being called itself Rill, last guardian of Vakal. It led them through the coral labyrinth, past chambers filled with relics, shattered ships, fractured stasis pods, and murals depicting the Luminari's rise and ruin. "We were architects," Rill said, its claw tracing a mural of a thriving Luminari civilization. "We seeded life, we merged, but the Devourers came, not your echelon older. They fed on symbiosis, turned it to ash." Soren frowned. "The Devourer we fought, it was a copy. A shadow, the true Devourers sleep, but your war has stirred them." Jin snorted. "Of course it has." In the deepest chamber, they found the source of the signal. A massive crystal spire, its surface etched with thousands of luminary faces frozen in silent screams. "The first choir," Rill said. "They sang the universe into balance. The Devourers silenced them."
This story continues. Subscribe to our channel, like the video, and listen to the rest.